I have two younger sisters. Their names are Lucy and Molly. Both are brilliant and formidable, very, very funny, generous, imaginative human beings. They're both accomplished professionals. They have children of their own at this point, and they are excellent parents. And yet, somehow, when we hang out, an irresistible force grips us. In WhatsApp groups and in each other's living rooms, on car trips and at family picnics, the three of us revert to our most juvenile, most unreconstructed selves. When I'm with my sisters, decades of adult life drop away, and all I'm interested in is being outrageous, being the biggest smartass, the most adolescent version of myself all over again. And to be clear, it's entirely their fault. They are a pair of monstrous bitches. I know how lucky I am to have the particular joy of siblings, people who know you better than most people in your life. Adult sibling dynamics make for great literature. It's the thing that stays with you when you remember Jonathan Franzen's The Corrections. And let's face it, Lizzie Bennet only makes sense because she has to navigate Lydia and Kitty's nonsense. Siblings push and pull one another in surprising directions. In a book, they offer fixed points in character alongside the opportunity for shifting perspectives and surprising motivations. So today, I'm talking with an author for whom that dynamic has shaped 3 brilliant novels. I'm speaking with Irish author Caoilinn Hughes. I'm Michael Williams, and this is Read This, a show about the books we love and the stories behind them. Caoilinn Hughes is an Irish poet and writer whose debut novel Orchid and the Wasp was published in 2018 to rave reviews. Since then, she's written several award-winning short stories and another novel in 2020 called The Wild Laughter. Her third and latest novel, The Alternatives, is maybe her best yet. I adored it. It follows the Flattery sisters, geologist Olwen, chef Nell, philosopher Maeve, and political scientist Rona, who were plunged prematurely into adulthood when their parents died in tragic circumstances. When the novel picks up, we find them in their 30s, living somewhat distant lives, fighting their own unique battles. But the disappearance of Olwen brings the siblings back together, forcing them to confront old wounds and rebuild alliances. As one of 5 children in her own family, Caoilinn is perfectly positioned to capture the specific tensions and dynamics that are at play with the Flattery sisters. And so that was where I wanted to begin our conversation. Siblings have played a major role in all 3 of your novels, and I'm interested in what it is about the sibling dynamic in particular that is useful as a novelist.
I can't get away from it. Yeah, I need to write a novel now about just colleagues or, friends. But yeah, the mega theme seems to be established. Adult siblings, I just think they're such interesting relationships because they're both a chosen relationship, but also they're not chosen. If you do stay in touch as adult siblings, that's not a given. So there is an element of choice there. And the reasons why people stay in touch, for example, if their worldviews are very different, can also be really interesting. For example, if you're in your 50s or 60s and your parents aren't around anymore, sometimes your siblings are the only people who are evidence of the fact that something happened. They were there. They know something. So you have this sense of your own life being more real because of their existence. And so that's something that's hard to put a price on in terms of the trauma that you're willing to go through by being triggered, by being around them, or putting to bed things that have never been absolved, or discussed even between you. In our friendships, you would never put up with big unresolved issues, and violence is done, to put it kind of in an extreme way. And I do think that in adult siblings, when those relationships are maintained and they're fraught, I do think that that's a very unique scenario where people have made a decision. There's a kind of calculus involved. This relationship is worth overlooking the fact that they haven't done this work on themselves is usually the way you're going to think about it yourself. They're probably thinking exactly the same thing. So I think that shared experience is so formative. But even though experiences can be shared among siblings, they also might have been experienced very differently.
One of the things you capture so well in the novel, I think, is that a lot of those dynamics centre around the question of care and responsibility, and how what we feel we owe to other people and the ways in which we feel we get the opportunity to choose to care, or whether we're forced to care because of that dynamic. And I think that's a really interesting recurring theme in this book. Who are we responsible to and how?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that who you pay attention to is a form of care, where your attention goes. So that's both kind of with how you spend your life in terms of the work that you do and the way that you spend your time, but also who you maintain relationships with. And I think that paying attention is a form of care. And it's really easy to forget that when we talk about the attention economy all the time, which is obviously a capitalist framework and is not a very helpful one. So I do think, the novel ended up being about care in a lot of ways that I didn't anticipate. And I was going to give it an epigraph by James Baldwin at a certain point. And it was, "Love is the only reality, the only terror, and the only hope." And I think that you could equally kind of substitute in there for love, care, which is kind of a synonym. But then I thought, well, no, you can't start a novel with a James Baldwin quote because it's going to be downhill from the reader's perspective from then. But I would never have known what the kind of epigraph or that kind of cohering idea would be at the beginning of the novel or even halfway through. It's only when I get to the end of a novel that I really know what it's about. I think I might have been afraid to write a novel about care. I think I was, that might seem a bit twee or coy or weirdly directed if I knew that to begin with. It's more just I started out with this feeling that in paying attention to Alwyn, the character who is a geologist who works in the earth sciences, so she's kind of representing someone who works in climate change. And I wanted to think about what it is to love someone who does that work. And to, I suppose, to support them and acknowledge them, as well as to be that person. And I was really afraid of where the novel might take me. So I'm very glad that it wound up being about the set of things that it's about, but I didn't know that to begin with.
Do I understand correctly? Your partner works in climate change, in climate science. It's such a fascinating thing to me. Like, I have friends who work in that space, and I know when we're at a dinner or a social thing, there's only so far anyone's willing to ask them about their work because they're aware of the rich seam of despair that sits just beneath the surface. And it's a fascinating dynamic that I think you captured beautifully here. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, it's so difficult to witness, especially if my partner's really interested in science communication and as a form of activism, I suppose, as a form of dealing with the feelings that arise from working in that area. It's so relentless and you kind of have to turn that into a form of action. Otherwise, it would eat you up. And so for him, communication is part of the action. But I have seen at dinner party, at social event, at mingling in a lobby, how quickly the question goes from what do you do for a living to do you have hope? And then you see this mental calibration going on of how much time does this person have? How much nuance can I give? And it's such a lot of responsibility to be thrown on you. And at any given point of the day, you never know where it's going to come from, that someone ultimately is starting to run scenarios in their mind for their family. And it's loaded. It's extremely difficult. So it's not just the work itself and the relentlessness of the data and the relentlessness of the pushback that there is in terms of dissemination of that data and really trying to equip people with what they can do, what they need to know. But also that caregiving load that you suddenly have as a responsibility, which can be very, very existential and very real in terms of the impact on the other people.
There's so much locked up in that, the relationship between the individual and the societal responsibility, that relationship, as you say, between care and responsibility. But the question about whether one has hope or not comes through again and again in the alternatives. And actually part of the power of the book is that it renders that question almost irrelevant. Having hope or not having hope is beside the point. We still have to find a way to go on, and we still have to find a way to be true to one another and to find meaning in whatever's left, either way of it. Is the novel singularly well placed to tease out those ideas, do you think?
So I set this novel as close to now as I could. I missed by about 9 months, but I tried to set it exactly when it would be published. So as I was writing, I was kind of changing the month, I was writing slower than I hoped. And I was trying to anticipate what was going to happen next year. When was COVID going to end? What would 2023 look like? But also try to capture the moment that I was in, because there are, at the beginning of the novel, there's a section that's set a little earlier. And it turns out that, well, it felt so urgent to write about now, because everything is changing so rapidly. It seems like the most interesting and also critical questions of our time are happening right now, and even tomorrow they'll be even more so. And so it just felt like, an urgent thing for me to do. That's the feeling that I went into the novel with. But then the process of writing it and trying to capture the now, but also anticipate what's just around the corner, mirrored partly what the novel is about, with that attempt to lurch forward in the story as the carpet's being pulled from beneath our feet. And that's a form of adaptation. So I was kind of having to do that as I was writing. And you can't write really any character in their profession today without getting, the huge issues of our time, inequality, climate change, all of the things that sit with under climate change, like biodiversity loss, land use problems, all of that. Those issues are pretty much epitomized in every job. There's no neutral zone. I suppose there's a cliche that a lot of novels open with the weather and often close with the weather as well. And that, often on the last page, there'll be some mention of light or some movement towards the sky, and so as a writer, it's really tough because, there's a reason why that's the case. And also a tone is established, but now there's no neutral weather. So as soon as you try and do that, which is just really to open a novel, it's already embroiled in these big existential, species-wide questions.
I'm glad you mentioned the question of how one's profession relates to that stuff, because the great engine of this book is actually the 4 different jobs of the 4 sisters and the work that they do. And I'm interested, when you have a geologist and a philosopher and a political scientist and a chef, of those 4 professions, which one was the hardest to write your way into? Because you do capture something, I think, that feels very authentic about each of those worlds. And I'm curious, are these like the 4 parts of Caoilinn Hughes? Like, can you manage all of those things yourself?
I am a very impatient cook. And if I start cooking, I want to eat within 30 minutes, which is, I'm a little better than Alwyn with her vegan schnitzel in the toaster.
Yeah, that's upsetting.
But yeah, so I really love food. I really, I am a bit of a foodie in that I appreciate it, but I don't have the patience. And so I think that if someone gets into cooking as part of their profession, they have got some fundamental aspects of their character that I'm missing. Also the ability to multitask. I can't do that. Mm-hmm. If I get a phone call and I'm walking on the street, I stop.
Yeah.
So,
fair.
And so the chef character I did actually have to do the most research for, honestly. Also with things like she's working around local produce, so to figure out what can be grown in England in which months. And then the geologist, Alwyn, was the character that I started with, and she's the character that I wrote the novel for, even though it's weighted equally. And I grew up on the west coast of Ireland. It's completely wind-stripped. I mean, there used to be an endemic forest there, but as Alwyn tells her students at one point, we went the full 100% in terms of getting rid of our ancient forests in Ireland. So there's no trees, and it's completely wind-stripped. And you see the geology shouldering out of the fields. And, there's this granite and limestone and these low-lying hills. And then this peat, which is, a resource that's kind of saving us in the sense of how much carbon is stored in there. And it's the contrast of the peat and then this rock where there's no soil, there's nothing you can grow. It was a really tragic area during the famine because it was so hard to grow enough food for subsistence. And so partly that landscape, I was writing the book mostly there, and I grew up on the west coast of Ireland. So something about the rocks and the fact that you could see the geology of the place embedded itself in me in some way that I think if I were to have 10 lives, one of them would be some form of being out in the landscape. I suppose I used to think about it as a very romantic job. To really be able to look at a landscape and read it and know the story, I find a really worthy way to spend your life. And I can understand, the impulse to spend your life doing that. But obviously today, to any work in the earth sciences is not at all romantic,
I would also say if you're too impatient for cooking, geology requires a next level of patience, possibly. I don't want to be rude, but...
Yeah, this is very true. Thank you. No, realistically, there's nothing else I can do. I mean, I'm not barely patient enough to write.
When we return, Caoilinn explores what it means to write a book about women at work, and also shares with us the near-death experience that shaped the writing of The Alternatives. We'll be right back.
Everyone remembers the first step on the moon. What if it had been the last? This Kingdom of Dust by David Dyer reimagines the moon landing from the eyes of Buzz, stuck on the moon, his wife Joan, trapped on Earth by society's expectations of her, and Aquarius, a journalist compelled to craft a story he doesn't want to write. This Kingdom of Dust reframes what the moon landing meant for all humankind. This Kingdom of Dust is out now.
As America heads into its presidential election with ever-increasing mistrust and misinformation, the question on everyone's mind is, what went wrong? Journalist Nick Bryant's best-selling book, The Forever War, argues that the roots of the hate we see in America today can be found in its troubled past, and how the rise of Donald Trump has been 250 years in the making. The Forever War offers a perceptive look at America's unending conflict with itself. The Forever War by Nick Bryant is out now.
All four sisters are almost most animated in the book at the points at which they're teaching, or the points at which they're sharing the things that seem urgent to them to another audience. And that sense of responsibility to pass on knowledge runs through all four of them in a kind of fundamental way.
Yeah, I think it started out as kind of funny to me that they'd all have PhDs. I just thought, it's like...
Also, 3 PhDs and 1 honorary doctorate is very important for a sibling dynamic as well. So it was funny to me, and also actually funny, but also great. It was buoying to start a novel thinking, yeah, I'm going to write about smart women and just deal with the fact that it probably won't be liked just by virtue of the fact that there's smart women in it, but also they're sisters. And I liked the idea that a book about sisterhood could also be a book about women at work, and that didn't need to be a separate book, and that we don't kind of go around our lives thinking about ourselves as being a sister, that we're kind of in our professional lives and we happen to be a sister within them, and kind of crossing those, especially for women whose there isn't a very clear line between their lives and their work. So 3 of the sisters are teaching. The one we haven't mentioned is the political scientist Rona. We don't see her teaching. She's kind of got the cushiest job of all of the siblings. And so there's a spectrum shown there, between the different types of privilege that you can have as a teacher. But yes, they are the philosopher Nell. We see her lecturing twice, actually, once in real life and then once on Zoom. So, as far away from Sex and the City as you can, For women with PhDs, kind of largely in the country, very little sex. I'm going to ask you to overlay which Sex and the City character they are, just to complete that image. There's a great line here. Rona tries to read Nell in every way she knows how to read a person, but she cannot resolve her. She's too exactly herself. There's such a nice summation of the problem siblings have seeing one another, I think. Mm-hmm. Not because of lack of knowledge, but because of too much.
Mm-hmm. But I think they do all love one another and want to be in each other's lives. And I think part of the pain of Rona's character, who's the one who's least involved and who they all kind of have issues with, but she is the one who I think there's the biggest trauma, therefore, in terms of feeling that the others don't really want or need her. And all of the other siblings acknowledge that they both want and need one another in some way, because the novel is partly about the delusion of self-sufficiency as a, coping mechanism, as a viable way of continuing in this world, and a viable iteration, of the trajectory, or that we're on. I really don't think that it is viable.
One of the ways that plays out for each of the characters is the presence of Leo, Rona's son, and the way in which something shifts when you conceive of yourself as an auntie rather than just as a sister, or as the presence of the next generation there has a kind of huge effect on each of the characters.
Yes. There's something else that's kind of bonding them, connecting them into the future. And I suppose they all would have an instinct to be involved in the upbringing of Leo, because their parents neither of them were really suited to being parents. Yeah. They had parents who probably were quite good company some days, and then were largely absent a lot, and so the instinct there would be to try and remedy that, as we often try and do the exact opposite of whatever our own formative traumas were. And I really wasn't sure how they would respond. So it was kind of entertaining for me, to initially put him in the car. Of course, I had a feeling that Maeve would be seeing her. Imagine if this was my son, because that's the moment that she's in her life, and she's very broody. And then Nell finds the child so relatable on the level of how curious he is about the world, and kind of what a blank slate he is in terms of having a clarity of perception. So she's kind of interested in terms of her own work and the phases, of childhood development. And they end up, having a surprising kind of bond in the book that I didn't anticipate.
One of the more unexpected sections of the alternatives is when the four sisters are finally reunited. Caoilinn uses the much-anticipated dramatic moment to change up her approach entirely, shifting from the close third-person narrative into the form of a play script. It comes at a point where we're already so deeply invested in the characters, so familiar with their inner lives, that having their interactions take the form of pure dialogue offers this speed and immediacy. It's intensely rewarding, if surprising, and I was curious to find out more. Why the play script?
Well, why not? That's that's basically it. No, because I write without a plan. You might have heard me say that before.
Write without a plan and no drafting. You just write and then you finish and then it's done.
Yes, and I really, really do not like to know anything that's coming up, because then I feel like I'm just creating a bridge from this moment to that moment. And nothing in the middle really matters. And for me, every page has to matter and could affect the story in a huge way. And that's kind of what I write for, is that discovery and that surprise, because a novel, for me, is always wiser and more surprising than I am myself. So that's why I write, to become a better person, or to learn something, to go somewhere new. So it's really important for me to not know. When you get very far into a novel, that's why I write faster when I get to the end, because you start to see it, because you know the characters so well, and also just things speed up. So when the novel turns into a play, I only figured out that would happen, or that it might happen, about 3 pages beforehand. And, I emailed a friend. I was like, oh, damn. So we got 4 PhD sisters, very little sex. And now there's a play in the middle of the novel. And my last novel involved a euthanasia case. So, I'm really just killing my own career.
You're loving it.
And I think it happened because this is when the siblings come together. And what happens when adult siblings come together? Talk. Just so much talk, and cross-talk and competitive talk. And I needed to get out of the character's way. I had the sense that by now in the novel, the reader, I hope, if I've done my job, the reader knows them and is interested to see what they're going to be like when they're together, and understands a lot of the ins and outs of Alwyn's relationship with Rona, with Nell's relationship with Alwyn. They want to see it. And it's a bit like, I guess, the reward of meeting like your in-laws after hearing about them for a really long time. The reward and the punishment. You know, you know so much about these people, but you just have to see it. And so, yes, it was partly just there was so much talk. If I was going to write it out in prose, the book would have been several hundred pages longer. And I didn't feel that the scope would then match the page count and the intensity of it as well. I mean, there's so much that kind of loaded in between every exchange. I like to think that as a reader, that would have been rewarding and a kind of payoff for having sat through several chapters where you're learning all about their lives separately and meeting characters that you're not really going to meet again. And so now here you're getting to see the core characters whose lives you've learned so much about. Yeah, I suppose there is a precedent. Years ago, I had read a couple of times Ulysses, and then I had listened to it. The last time I kind of read it, quote unquote, was as an audiobook. And so I'd forgotten actually that the Circe chapter is as a play. So it was cool to go back to that afterwards. But it was actually, I had forgotten about it until after I wrote this book, and then went back and thought, okay, well, there was a precedent, and not a bad one.
Good precedent to follow as far as they go.
Recently, I read Isabella Hammad's Enter Ghost, which is really, really good. I loved it. And it's about a Palestinian theatrical group trying to put on a production of Hamlet. And so you see kind of the director and all the actors in scenes, and then it goes into play script mode as they're rehearsing now and then. So I thought that was really cool. It was nice to see. Hopefully it's a trend.
Did I read correctly that you were hit by a truck while writing this book?
Yes, I was.
That seems a bit on the nose as a metaphor, but also not terribly helpful creatively, I would imagine.
Well, it definitely passed the "is this the book you should be writing if were you to be hit by a bus," test, which is genuinely the thing I always ask myself when I'm writing a book. Is this the book that were you to be hit by, I usually say a bus, insert truck, that you would need to be writing, that you'd be glad to have been writing? And it turns out that you are simultaneously glad, but also in the moment of being hit and just before being hit are absolutely tortured by, because it's like finally, like I am writing the book that I must write and I am not going to get to finish it. Actually, my thought was, and I didn't get to finish my fucking book. That was the thought. I was like almost shaking my head.
How far into the book were you?
I was very far in. I was actually in the play section. And if I had been 10% less far through the book, I would have lost the book. So even if I'd survived the accident, I would have lost the book, because the way that I write, it builds momentum. And at a certain point, if you stop or there's any kind of slowdown or pause, you can just lose it. And I've never, ever been able to retrieve work that I paused and stopped. One of the things I started out with this book, during COVID, was I wanted there to be some form of joy on every page. And I felt at the time that to write a novel is to kind of believe in the future. It's a kind of an act of faith, because everything during COVID, there was no certainty. And people were reading fewer books. People were kind of binging on Netflix. And I was simultaneously really worried that all art from that period would be reduced in the sense that it would be based on memory rather than witnessed, and lived experience, and the serendipity that most artists live for, where when you're really deep into a work, it seems like the whole world is refracted through what you're working on and is relevant to it. And that's something that any artist listening will recognize. It's, one of the most amazing things about making art. So I wanted there to be joy to bring me out of the COVID-ness, and also because I really value humor in novels. And so the sisters did make me laugh, and so did all the other characters in the book. And after the crash, I was very grateful for that, but also it hurt to laugh. It really hurt. Like, they were physically hurt because it was my ribs that were mostly damaged. So it was very tough. Like, whenever there was a funny line.
That's good. I like the idea that that's how the novelist punishes herself after an accident, is make yourself laugh. It's the only way. Caoilinn, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Caoilinn Hughes' novel, The Alternatives, is available at all good bookstores now. Before we go, I wanted to tell you what I've been reading this week. And like so many other readers, I was a huge fan of Taffy Brodesser-Akner's debut novel, Fleischman is in Trouble. Her follow-up novel, Long Island Compromise, is out. It's about a kidnapping and the ripples and resonances of it through several generations of the family that come next. It is an absolute romp, and I had a great time with it. You can find it and all the other books we mentioned today at your favourite independent bookstore. That's it for this week's show. As always, like, share, subscribe, follow, review, share, like, subscribe, all of the things. Next week on Read This, I'm joined by Australian journalist and novelist Malcolm Knox to discuss the writing of his latest novel, The First Friend.
This book was probably the most fun that I've ever had writing anything, and I hope that's conveyed because it is, on a surface level, potentially quite a grim place and time in the Great Terror in the Soviet Union in 1938. Fun is not what immediately springs to mind.
Read This is produced and edited by Clara Ames, with mixing by Travis Evans. Original compositions are by Zoltan Fetcher. Thanks for listening. See you next week.